The story of the Alcatraz occupation was not merely an act of rebellion. It was a movement that reverberated through the corridors of power and ignited the flames of change. Every brushstroke of graffiti, every defiant word spoken by the occupiers was not just an outcry against oppression, it was a battle cry for justice. They knew their actions would shatter the complacency of a nation long accustomed to ignoring the plight of its first peoples. And with each passing day, they ensured that their message became not just louder, but impossible to ignore. In their manifesto, boldly addressed to the so-called Great White Father, a scathing reference to the U.S. government, the activists made a mock offer to buy Alcatraz for $24 in beads and red cloth, the same pitiful sum their ancestors had been forced to accept for the land that would become Manhattan. It was a pointed reminder of the U.S. its long history of deceit, exploitation, and broken promises. But it was more than that. It was a demand for respect, recognition, and restitution. What began as a small group of determined Native American activists quickly transformed into a movement that captivated the nation and the world. The media swarmed the island, their cameras rolling as more and more people joined the cause. Soon, Alcatraz was teeming with life and energy as over 600 Native Americans from tribes across the country made their way to the island. It became a powerful symbol of resistance and self-determination. The iron bars and crumbling concrete of the former prison, once a symbol of despair and confinement, were repurposed as a stage for a message of hope, resilience, and defiance. The occupation turned the island into a vibrant cultural and political hub, where songs, stories, and ceremonies took center stage, and where the values of community and shared struggle united people from all walks of life. Celebrities like Jane Fonda, Marlon Brando, and Anthony Quinn threw their support behind the movement, amplifying the voices of the activists and helping to shine a spotlight on their cause. Even rock bands joined with Creedence Clearwater Revival, donating a boat to help the occupiers transport supplies between the island and the mainland. What was happening on Alcatraz was no longer just a protest. It was a cultural revolution, a movement that sought to rewrite the history books and reclaim the narrative of Native American resistance. For once, indigenous voices were not just being heard, they were being amplified on a national stage. Life on Alcatraz was far from easy, but for the occupiers, it was exhilarating. The island became a microcosm of a new vision for Native American sovereignty. The occupiers formed their own governing council, built a school to educate their children, and even established their own security force, which they cheekily named the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs. This was not just a jab at the U.S. government's Bureau of Indian Affairs, long seen as an agent of oppression, but a profound statement of independence and self-governance. Alcatraz had become a place where Native Americans could begin to imagine a different kind of future, one where their culture, language, and traditions could thrive without interference. The sense of community was palpable. People who had been separated by geography and the brutal legacy of colonization came together, united by a shared history of suffering and a common vision of freedom. The occupation was more than just a protest. It was a living, breathing reclamation of identity, culture, and sovereignty. This was the spark that ignited a movement, and for a time, it seemed unstoppable. But as the occupation stretched on, the challenges mounted. The early days of unity and purpose began to fray as internal divisions emerged. The original leaders, including Richard Oakes, who had played a crucial role in galvanizing the movement, began to drift away, replaced by others who didn't always share the same vision or commitment to the cause. Drugs and alcohol, which had been strictly banned at the start of the occupation, began to infiltrate the island, undermining the unity and discipline that had been so essential in the early days. The movement suffered a devastating blow when Richard Oakes's young stepdaughter tragically fell to her death on the island. Heartbroken and demoralized, Oakes and his family left Alcatraz, leaving behind a leadership vacuum that proved difficult to fill. The loss of Oakes, a charismatic and passionate leader, was a turning point for the occupation. Without his guidance and vision, the movement struggled to maintain its momentum, and the cracks in the unity of the occupiers began to widen. Despite these setbacks, the occupiers remained steadfast in their commitment to the cause. The U.S. government, unsure of how to handle the situation, adopted a strategy of waiting it out, hoping that the protest would eventually collapse under its own weight. But the activists refused to be dislodged, even as conditions on the island became increasingly difficult. Food and supplies ran low, and the harsh realities of life on the island began to take their toll. But for the occupiers, this was more than just a protest. It was a stand for their dignity, their rights, and their future. The occupation finally came to an end on June 11, 1971, when federal marshals descended on the island and forcibly removed the remaining holdouts. It was a bitter end to a protest that had captured the imagination of so many. But while the occupation of Alcatraz may have ended, its impact was far from over. The occupation of Alcatraz achieved something far greater than its immediate goals. It sparked a wave of protests and occupations across the country as Native Americans from coast to coast were inspired to take a stand for their rights and their lands. From Plymouth Rock to Mount Rushmore, indigenous peoples began to rise up, demanding justice, recognition, and the return of their stolen lands. The legacy of Alcatraz lived on in these movements, as it became a symbol of the power of defiance and the strength of a people determined to reclaim their place in history. Even the U.S. government was forced to take notice. President Nixon, in a historic speech in 1970, acknowledged the significance of the Native American movement and declared that the time had come for a new era in which the future of Native peoples would be determined by their own decisions. It was a major victory for the activists, and it marked a turning point in the fight for Native American rights. The occupation of Alcatraz remains a powerful symbol of resistance and resilience to this day. It showed the world that indigenous peoples would no longer be marginalized or silenced. They would stand up, fight back, and demand their rightful place in history. Alcatraz, once a prison, became a beacon of liberation, and its legacy continues to inspire generations of activists fighting for justice and equality. The unbreakable spirit of the Native American people lives on, a testament to their strength, courage, and determination to rise from the ashes of their past and build a better future for themselves and their children. In the end, the occupation of Alcatraz was not just a protest against the injustices of the past. It was a bold declaration of a new future. A future where Native American voices would be heard, where their rights would be respected, and where their cultures would flourish. It was a powerful reminder that the fight for justice is never over, and that the spirit of resistance lives on in every generation that dares to stand up and demand their place in the world. The story of Alcatraz is not just a chapter in the history of Native American activism. It is a story of hope, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of a people who refuse to be erased. The legacy of Alcatraz will live on as a symbol of the power of defiance, the strength of community, and the unshakable belief in a better future.